So the first thing we ought to talk about is, what does composition mean? It's really a simple concept. We have a frame in our camera. Generally it's rectangular. I shoot sometimes with a Hasselblad, it's square. But most of us are shooting rectangular frames, right? So what you place within the frame of your camera is what composition is all about. How you put your subject in that frame to best tell your story is really what composition is all about, what it means. The derivation is from Latin, and it means put together. So you're putting together your photograph to tell a visual story to someone else so that they see and ideally feel what you felt at the time you were there. Does that make sense? That's what composition is. Now, there's a lot of ways that you can train your eye, and you do need to train your eye to see images. They don't just jump out at you and go, hey, Mark, shoot this over here. Mark, back here. There's a photograph over there. You actually, just like training anything, can train your eye. And one way to do it, and I talk about it in that first book, is to do this. Without a camera, you can use a card. You can cut out a framing card, we call them. But it's a good exercise because it's the first thing you need without a camera, is to be able to see a photograph. Now, have you ever gone into an environment and you think there's somewhere in this place, there's a photograph, and it's sort of like playing hide and seek. You have to look around, and you have to really look carefully until you find it. And then when you find it, hopefully you capture it. So this is something I definitely recommend. Now, we're going to start with number one in the toolkit, and that's framing. This was the very first thing I learned as a photographer. My uncle, who was a World War II, his name was Sambo. He was a World War II Top Gun pilot, and he was a photographer. And he taught me when I was about 12 years old about framing. Framing is like your chef's knife. You're going to use it constantly over and over and over again. And it's also, you'll see as we go through these, it's really, there's variations of how you frame something. But framing really comes in because what it does is it takes the subject and highlights it. This is a photograph by Bob Holmes, fantastic travel photographer. And you can see in this one, he had 3 frames, and he utilized all 3 of them cleverly. So what it does is it does a bunch of different things. One of them, this is a photograph I took in Big Sur, California, down the coast. So the fence frames the background, and it does these things. First of all, the fence and the tree add a layer of contrast and depth to the photograph. Otherwise, it would appear flat. So one of the tricks that we've got, and one of the reasons we need these compositional tools, is that photography is a 2-dimensional art form. It's not 3D. But how do you get that feeling of depth into it? Because if you get the feeling of depth, it's going to have more reality, because that's how our eyes see. So whenever you can bring depth and layers into your photograph, you're going to enhance the vision of it. So then, when we look at what happens, the frame basically takes your eye and directs it to the background. So you get the layers, you get directing your eye, and that's the beauty and the power of framing. In my course, The Secrets to Amazing Photo Composition from the Masters, you're going to learn that every picture tells a story, but how do you tell yours? You're going to learn composition secrets that the master artists have used for centuries. You're going to learn how to pull your viewer into the center of interest of your photo, and how to use contrast to build excitement. What are the many different ways to frame your image, and how mood lines can affect your photo? Hey, what happens when you use the wrong mood to tell your story, and what really happens when you use the right one? I give you 83 composition techniques and how you can use them like a great chef uses recipes to create amazing meals. Jump on board with this course right now. You're going to love it. Skipping to number 4. one thing you can always do is turn your camera at an angle. And I might as well preach to you guys about this right now. Too many people walk around and just shoot at eye level only. I'm guilty of that. Why do we do that? Because that's the way we see the world. But is that the most interesting vantage point? Sometimes no. Many times no. And you'll see pro photographers, they're moving around all over the place. You know, they're moving high, low, crouching this way, going that way. And one of the things you shouldn't be afraid of is realizing that your camera doesn't just have to go like this or like that. You can turn it on an angle. This happens to be a photograph that I took in the 7th grade, which is when I really became a photographer. That's when I first learned about the darkroom, which was a magical experience. And all of a sudden I thought, okay, I don't just take these rolls of film, take them to the drugstore and hope that they do a good job, which they never did. I could control the processing myself, and that made me a photographer. This happens to be a classroom, my 7th grade classroom. I went to a pretty beatnik school in California, progressive school, and some of my classmates had made this sort of, looks like sculpture during recess or something. And the first shot on the left was just, you know, framing it straight up and down like this. The second shot, I turned the camera at a 20-degree angle, which gives it more interest. Would you agree? It's much more interesting than just straight up and down. So remember to turn your camera. That's the message. Now we're into the points of thirds. You notice it doesn't say rule of thirds. It says points of thirds, and it's a compositional tool. These photographs were taken by a nature photographer, David Smith, in South Africa. Fabulous photographer. So he made the point of, I have a video where he talked about this. If you use your lines of thirds and you line up at those intersections key points, as you can see with the zebra's face, and the zebra also, he said, leave space where the zebra is looking, or the animal is looking, or the person is looking, your subject, leave space in the frame so you get that feeling of a space and expansion there. Otherwise, it's going to feel kind of closed and crossed up, and like you're not able to get the kind of space that you want out of your subject. So that was a point that he made. And the other one, similar with the leopard, is leave space where, in this case, the animal's looking down. It gives, again, a feeling of depth. Really no rule, it's just points of thirds. Okay. Geometry is an amazing thing, and it plays a part in almost every compositional tool of photography. Henri Cartier-Bresson was one of my mentors as a photographer growing up. And he said, the greatest joy for me is geometry. He's French, and this is the way he phrased it. That means a structure. It is a sensuous pleasure, an intellectual pleasure, at the same time to have everything in the right place. It's a recognition of an order which is in front of you. And that's another key point of composition. It's having a sense of order and balance. And that goes back not to just photography, but the classic works of art. If you examine them, you get this feeling of order and harmony that comes out of it. And we'll be exploring some of those in a minute. So this is an example of using geometry in a photograph. This is also on the California coast. You see this bridge in a lot of movies. You see it in, you know, commercials and shots and whatnot. There's two things that are interesting about this. So here's a lot of geometry. You have the curves, you have the rectangles, you have lines, you even have the jagged sort of triangular faces of these cliffs here, and the lines going back where the road is. The thing about this particular image is that the sun was going down. And, you know, what we tend to do when the sun's going down is we face right into the sun and take photographs of the sun going down, right? So you get nice sunsets. But really, you know, much more interesting thing, because how many sunsets can you record? After you shoot 10,000 of them like I have, there's probably something else you can do with that sunset. Another thing you can do is turn the other direction, which is similar to the thing I mentioned about moving your camera around. turn around and look the other way where that beautiful, warm, golden hour light is hitting whatever the subject is. In this case, it was the bridge. It could be a person, though. That's very beautiful light to take a portrait in as that sun goes down and you get the golden hour. So there's a couple of messages in this one. A line is the simplest, form of geometry. In this case, you have leading lines which lead your viewer's attention to where you want it to go. In this case, it's the subject, a girl carrying a saddle. This is taken in Vermont. And the road converges and it leads right to her. Now, the other thing about this is that there's a really important thing in composition, which is you want to actively lead your viewer where you want them to see and what you want them to see, and leave out those things you don't want them to see. Now, let's say there was a really shiny hubcap right at the base of this photograph. Where would your eye go? The first stop it would make is that shiny hubcap. And then you kind of go, okay, then you go back to where the subject is. So the viewer's a little confused. Is this a photograph about a shiny hubcap, or is this one that is supposed to lead my eye back to the girl with the saddle? And it's like visual storytelling is just like telling any kind of story. Tell it in a way that it makes it easy for the person to understand and follow you. And that's, again, another point about these compositional tools. Here's another example as a painting. And one of the reasons I use a lot of paintings in the book is to kind of close the gap on what I've seen has been a bit of a disconnect between modern photography. By the way, I just discovered that photography wasn't just developed in the last 5 years on Instagram. Did you guys know that? I just found that out. But I'm being silly, but there's a disconnect of where did photography come from? It came from classic visual art, right? Those guys really figured this stuff out. These classical artists really knew about composition. And in this case, this is another example of leading lines. This is a beautiful painting, almost photographic. I mean, look at the detail in it. It's just with the reflection and the buildings that you could quickly look at it and think it was a photograph, except it was from 1672. But again, we put the dotted lines there just to emphasize that's where your eye goes. It kind of goes to that corner, and it's almost like there's a little mystery there. I wonder what's around that corner, which is another powerful tool that you can use. It's leading. You don't have to tell the whole story. You kind of lead somebody, and then they can kind of finish the story in their own mind. Just like a good storyteller will do that. You don't have to say everything. Let the other person add to it and embellish it and bring about their own kind of visualization into the process. We have a fantastic bundle of 3 courses. The first one is Secrets to Amazing Photos from the Masters. I'll show you how to grow as a photographer and tell your story, which is the whole pleasure of photography. You can make amazing photos following the exact stages of photography. You'll learn the secret sauce that pros use, like how to visualize your photos, knowing your equipment cold, how to capture images with amazing light and composition skills, how to edit your images to make them pop, and finally, how to get your photos out to the world. The next course is Secrets to Amazing Photo Composition from the Masters. Every picture tells a story, but how do you tell yours in the most effective way? Learn composition secrets that master artists have used for centuries. I give you 83 composition techniques and how you can use them like a chef uses his recipes to create amazing meals. Also included in this bundle is Secrets to Amazing Photos with the legendary Bob Holmes. How does a National Geographic photographer approach a shoot? What gets Bob inspired? What gear does he recommend and why? What's the difference between looking and seeing? As he said, most people look but often don't see a photo. You're going to learn his biggest secret to learning about light. How to use many lighting and composition techniques that National Geographic photographers use. This bundle, of course, is a fantastic opportunity to take your photography to whole new levels and at a huge savings you won't want to miss. Grab your bundle today and start advancing your photography right now.